I used to believe loyalty at work meant something, until the day my boss smiled at me across the conference table and told me I was being transitioned out. Minutes later, his nephew, fresh from college, no experience, was in my chair. I swallowed the humiliation, but inside something cracked. They thought I'd walk away quietly. What they didn't know was that for months, I'd been quietly collecting every shady deal, every falsified report, every email that could burn this place to the ground. And the moment the boardroom doors closed behind them, I knew exactly when and how I'd strike. When I first joined Helix Systems, they called me the guy who could fix anything: servers, code, workflow nightmares. If it was broken, I could get it running again before anyone noticed. Over the years, that reputation became my armor and my prison. I was the indispensable one, the man you called at 2 in the morning when the system crashed, the one who never left before the lights went out. That night was no different. It was nearly midnight when I finally shut down my terminal. The office was quiet, just the low hum of the cooling units and the distant buzz of the elevators. I rubbed my eyes, packed my bag, and headed home. When I opened the front door, the house was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway nightlight. My wife was asleep on the couch, a book slipping from her hand. I tiptoed down the hallway to my daughter's room. She was curled under her blanket, breathing softly. I stood there for a long moment, just watching her. Her hair had fallen over her eyes, and I gently brushed it back. This was my pause button, the one quiet space between the chaos of work and the noise in my own head. The next morning, back at my desk, I noticed something unusual in the system logs. A security flag had popped up. Nothing major at first glance, just a routine notification. But the timestamp didn't match any authorized access, and the file it pointed to wasn't supposed to exist. I dug deeper, fingers flying over the keyboard, tracing the origin through layers of code until I found it. A vulnerability buried in an old module we'd retired years ago. Left alone, it could be exploited to bypass our entire authentication system. I sat back in my chair, weighing my options. If I reported it now, the system would flag my account as the one who accessed the data. In the wrong hands, it would look like I'd created the vulnerability myself. I could fix it quietly, patch it before anyone even knew. My cursor hovered over the Report Issue button, then slid away. Not yet. Just then, a new email pinged my inbox. The sender's address made my stomach tighten. It was from a user account that had been deleted 2 years ago. No subject line, no body text, just a single attachment named README. I didn't open it, not yet. By mid-afternoon, the office buzzed with the usual chatter. I stepped into the conference room for the weekly project review. My heart sank as I watched one of my closest colleagues, Daniel, standing at the front of the room. He was explaining a new system optimization plan, my system optimization plan, the one I'd been refining for months. My slides, my metrics, even my phrasing. And the room was eating it up. I caught his eye from across the table. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. That night at dinner, the silence between my wife and me was heavy. She finally broke it. It's been almost 8 years, Ethan. You've pulled in more revenue for that company than anyone I know, but you're still in the same position. Why haven't they promoted you? I pushed my food around on my plate. It's complicated. Complicated how? Her voice was calm but firm. I didn't answer. I couldn't tell her about the email, the vulnerability, or the fact that my friend had just presented my work as his own. The next morning, I passed by Daniel's desk. He was leaning back in his chair, reading something on his screen. I caught a glimpse of the sender's name, our boss, and a subject line, follow-up, transition plan. My pulse quickened. As I walked by, I caught a few words. Ensure Ethan's responsibilities are reassigned smoothly. The word transition landed like a blow. Transition meant out. Later that day, I was on my way to grab a coffee when I heard voices behind the glass door of the executive conference room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. I froze. He's been here too long, a voice said, our boss. We need someone who's aligned with our direction. Another voice, quieter but clear. Chad's ready. It's time. Chad. The boss's nephew. Fresh out of college. A walking LinkedIn profile with no real skills but a last name that opened every door in the building. I stood there, the paper cup crumpling in my hand. My mind flashed back to the email from the deleted account, the vulnerability in the system, Daniel's sudden innovation, and now this. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed wasn't one I liked. If you found something that could save your company but also destroy your career, would you speak up? Or would you keep it to yourself, waiting for the right moment? I walked back to my desk, the sound of their voices still in my ears. In my inbox, that same email from the deleted account sat there, unopened. I clicked it, and that's when I saw the first line. They're going to replace you sooner than you think. The announcement came on a Thursday morning. We were all called into the open plan common area, where the boss stood smiling in that rehearsed corporate way. We're excited to welcome Chad as our new head of systems, he said, clapping a hand on his nephew's shoulder. Chad grinned, waving like a minor celebrity. His tie was crooked. I stood in the back, my stomach sinking. No mention of me, no acknowledgement of the years I'd put in, the nights I'd worked until the sun came up. Just a polite nod in my direction before moving on to the next piece of company news. Later that day, I drove to see my mother. She was standing in her garden when I arrived, wearing her old sun hat, tending to her roses. You look tired, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Are you eating enough? I'm fine, Mom, I lied. She studied me for a moment. You've been there for so long, Ethan. You've worked so hard. Please tell me they're treating you right. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tell her everything. How they'd handed my job to someone unqualified just because he shared the boss's bloodline. How the betrayal felt like a knife between my ribs. But I swallowed it all and said, yeah, everything's fine. The next morning, as I was grabbing a coffee in the break room, Chad strolled in like he owned the place. Ethan, he said, flashing that politician's smile. I know this transition might be a little awkward, but here's the deal. Help me settle in, make me look good in front of the board, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. Perks, bonuses, maybe even a role somewhere else in the company. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. He leaned in slightly. Or you can make this harder for both of us. I didn't answer. I just walked away. When I got back to my desk, I powered on my computer. A red notification flashed on my screen. Access denied. My primary account, the one I used to manage critical system data, had been locked. No warning, no explanation. I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't panic. Instead, I logged in through a backdoor I'd quietly kept in place for years, a relic from a system overhaul long before Chad showed up. It was the same loophole I'd found when I discovered the security vulnerability. They thought I'd handed over the keys. They didn't know I'd kept a copy. That night, I tried to put the day behind me. My daughter begged me to play a board game before bedtime, and for half an hour, I almost forgot about the office. She laughed, accusing me of cheating when I won, and I promised a rematch tomorrow. But even as I smiled, my mind was elsewhere, running scenarios, plotting moves. Back at my desk the next morning, I began combing through logs and internal memos. That's when I saw it, a series of messages between Chad and a senior board member, Patricia Lane. At first, they seemed harmless, just scheduling meetings. But then I saw the attachments, budget proposals, project forecasts, all with my name removed and Chad's inserted. This wasn't just nepotism. Patricia was coaching him, feeding him material, setting him up to take credit for my work in front of the entire board. And based on the timestamps, this had been going on for months, long before anyone had mentioned a transition. The realization hit hard. Chad wasn't acting alone. There was a larger plan, and I was the obstacle they needed to remove. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces falling into place. The vulnerability I'd found. The email from the deleted account. Daniel's sudden innovation. Now Patricia's fingerprints on the whole scheme. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordinated. My inbox pinged. A new email appeared. No sender, no subject. The body contained a single line. If you want the truth, meet me in the basement parking lot at 11 p.m. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat in my ears. Whoever sent this knew what I was up against. The question was whether they were a friend or another trap. The basement parking lot was quiet, lit only by a few dim security lamps that flickered in the corners. My footsteps echoed against the concrete as I walked toward the far end, scanning for movement. A figure stepped out from behind a pillar. A man in a faded hoodie, hands in his pockets. "Ethan?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. "It's Mark. We worked together in IT before I left." I remembered him. Sharp, restless, the kind of guy who could write code faster than most people could type their own names. He glanced over his shoulder before speaking again. "You need to know something. The numbers you're seeing in the quarterly reports, they're fake. They've been doctoring the data for months, maybe longer. It's all to keep the investors happy until they can pull in a massive round of funding." My gut tightened. "How?" Mark's eyes flicked to me, almost guilty. "They're using a masking script in the analytics system. And you wrote part of it." I froze. "That's not possible. Then I remembered. 3 years ago, I'd built a patch to filter out irrelevant test data from customer reports. I hadn't thought about it since. "They repurposed your patch," Mark continued. "All they had to do was tweak it. Now it hides negative performance metrics instead of just test runs. It looks legitimate because it's your code." The weight of it hit me like a punch. Not only had they stolen my work, they'd turned it into a weapon. Mark handed me a USB drive. "This has proof. Original logs, before they were altered. But be careful. If they find out you have it..." A sound echoed from the far ramp. Footsteps, quick and heavy. Mark's head snapped up. "I have to go." "Wait!" But he was already running toward the stairwell. By the time I reached it, he was gone. I tried calling his phone. It rang once, then cut off. When I tried again, It went straight to voicemail. The next morning, I locked my office door and slid the USB into my personal laptop. The files were there. Pages of raw data, side-by-side comparisons of actual numbers, and the falsified ones in the official reports. If I could match these to internal communications, it would be enough to expose them. I started copying everything I could access from my back door into a secure drive. Every file, every email thread, every internal memo that hinted at manipulation. The process was slow, and my eyes kept darting to the door as if someone might burst in at any moment. Around noon, I called my mother. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in." Her voice softened instantly. "Ethan, you sound tired." "I'm fine," I lied again. But this time, my voice wavered. "You don't have to tell me what's going on," she said. "I just want you to know. You've always done the right thing. Don't let anyone take that from you." "I know," I said quietly. "I'll be okay." I wanted to believe it. Later that afternoon, while sorting through Chad's communications, I found something unexpected. Emails from Patricia Lane, the same board member I'd seen coaching him, but the tone was different. Less like a mentor, more like a handler. She wasn't just helping him, she was giving him direct orders. And the more I read, the clearer it became. Chad wasn't in full control. He was a pawn, being used by a faction within the board to secure their own grip on the company. Whatever arrogance he had, it was wrapped around a core of fear. That realization didn't make him innocent, but it changed the game. If Chad was disposable to them, then so was anyone else who stood in their way. I was piecing together a timeline when my computer screen froze. The mouse wouldn't move. The keyboard was dead. Then the screen went black, and white letters appeared in the center. "We know what you're doing." I sat there, staring at the words. My pulse pounded in my ears. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching. They were inside my system. And if they were inside my system, they knew exactly what I had. It happened on a Monday morning, the kind that starts gray and cold, like the weather already knew what was coming. My phone buzzed with an email from HR. "You are required to attend an urgent meeting in conference room 5A at 9 a.m. No explanation. Just the kind of summons you don't ignore. When I walked in, the air felt heavier. At the head of the table sat the boss, Patricia Lane, and two members of the board I barely knew. A legal counsel I'd never seen before was flipping through a folder thick with printed pages. My chair scraped the floor as I sat down. "Ethan," the counsel began, "we've received credible evidence that you've been tampering with company systems, specifically that you've accessed restricted files and altered security logs." My heart pounded. "That's not true." Patricia's eyes were flat. "Then how do you explain the activity logs showing unauthorized access from your account?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the door opened and a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Because those logs are incomplete." It was Kevin, one of the few people I trusted from my early days at Helix. He'd left years ago for a startup, but still had friends in the building. He walked to the table, a USB drive in hand, and plugged it into the screen. "Here's the full system log from that night," he said, bringing up a split display. On the left, the official log the board had been shown. On the right, Kevin's unaltered version. In Kevin's log, my account was accessed. Then, seconds later, so was an administrative override from an account that no longer existed. "Whoever accessed those files after Ethan," Kevin said, is the one who tampered with them, not him. For a moment, the room was silent. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. But then the file on the screen flickered, and the log Kevin had displayed cut off halfway through. A system error message replaced the rest of the data. What happened to the rest of it? One of the board members asked. Kevin frowned. It was there when I pulled it. Someone must have... He stopped himself. My gut told me the truth. Someone had just reached into the system in real time and erased the rest. Patricia closed the folder in front of her. We'll need to reconvene once we have all the facts. It wasn't an acquittal, but it wasn't a conviction either. After the meeting, I pulled Kevin aside. Why did you come? Because I know you didn't do this, he said. But you're not just fighting Chad. There's a whole machinery behind him. He glanced around before lowering his voice. Be careful. Back in my office, I stared at my screen. The words from the last hack still burned into my mind. We know what you're doing. The game had changed. They weren't just planting evidence. They were controlling the narrative in real time. That night, I compiled a report of everything I'd gathered. The falsified data, the masked scripts, the chain of emails between Chad and Patricia. I encrypted it and sent it to one person I believed was neutral, board member Samuel Hayes. He had a reputation for keeping his head down, staying out of politics. If anyone could quietly push for an investigation without tipping off the wrong people, it was him. Hours later, I sat down to dinner with my wife and daughter. We hadn't eaten together in weeks. My daughter insisted I try the pasta she'd made almost all by herself. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed without forcing it. For a little while, the walls of the office felt far away. I even let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could still steer this back toward justice. The next day, I waited for a response from Samuel. By late afternoon, instead of an email from him, there was a company-wide announcement. The ongoing internal investigation into recent technical irregularities was being postponed indefinitely. No explanation. My first thought was that they'd gotten to him. My second was that maybe Samuel had never been as neutral as I thought. Either way, it was clear. Someone higher up had just shut the door on my only official channel. I was still staring at the announcement when my phone buzzed. The caller ID made my stomach flip. It was Chad. Ethan, he said as soon as I answered, his voice lower than usual, stripped of its usual smugness. We need to meet. Urgently. What for? This isn't about me trying to screw you over anymore, he said. It's about survival for both of us. We met in the back booth of a quiet diner just off the highway. Chad was already there, leaning forward, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't touched. His usual swagger was gone, the confident grin replaced by tight, nervous lines around his mouth. I don't have much time, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. They're watching me too. I studied him for a moment, unsure if this was just another manipulation. You called me, Chad, so talk. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black USB drive, placing it on the table between us. These are copies of the contracts Patricia had me sign off on. They're not just fudging numbers. They're laying the groundwork for a takeover. And it's not coming from inside the board. I picked up the drive, turning it over between my fingers. Who's behind it? His eyes darted around the diner before he leaned in. A shell company. But I traced the registration. It all leads back to a private equity firm overseas, the kind that buys companies, strips them for parts, and sells what's left. They're using Patricia as the inside leverage to hand the place over for pennies. It fit. Every suspicious move, every false report, every decision that chipped away at Helix's stability. It was all deliberate, designed to make the company look ripe for rescue. Chad sat back, his voice low. I was promised a position in the new structure, but I'm realizing now, I'm not part of the end game. Neither are you. When they're done, there won't be anything left to save. For a long moment, we just sat there. I hated him for what he'd done to me. But now, in this light, he looked less like the enemy and more like another piece on someone else's chessboard. I'll need to verify everything, I said, pocketing the USB. You do that, Chad replied, but be careful. Once you have proof, they'll come for you, harder than ever. That night, back at my home office, I plugged in the USB. The files were a gold mine. Altered contracts, email chains, payment schedules, all pointing to a coordinated plan to dismantle Helix. One contract in particular spelled it out plainly: transfer of majority ownership to an offshore entity the moment a material financial downturn could be declared. It was a corporate death sentence disguised as a business rescue. I copied everything onto my encrypted drive, making multiple backups in different locations. This was the kind of evidence that could end careers, maybe even land people in prison. It was close to midnight when the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp in the stillness, making me jump. My wife was asleep. My daughter's room was dark. I went to the door, peered through the peephole. Nothing. The porch light cast a pale cone over the empty driveway. I opened the door slowly. The cold air rushed in. Still nothing. No package, no note. Just silence. Closing the door, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Someone had been there. I was sure of it. By morning, I'd made my decision. Playing it safe wasn't going to cut it anymore. I drafted a message to the entire board, attaching the verified files from Chad's USB along with my own documentation. I didn't stop there. I sent the same packet to the Financial Crimes Division of the State Attorney's Office. If Helix was going to burn, I wasn't going to let it happen quietly. The responses came quickly. From the board, silence, except for an automated message received from the company's internal system. From the authorities, a brief acknowledgement and a promise to follow up. I knew that once the gears started turning, it would be hard to stop them. That evening, I let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. My daughter fell asleep early, curled against me on the couch as we watched a movie. I carried her to her bed, tucked the blanket around her, and whispered, I did the right thing. Ma, I wasn't sure if I was saying it for her or for myself. 2 days later, the first leaks hit the press. An anonymous source, me, had provided evidence of fraudulent reporting and suspicious offshore dealings. The stock price tumbled. The board called an emergency meeting. Patricia's name was on every news ticker, tied to words like embezzlement and corruption. But even as I watched the fallout begin, there was no satisfaction. Just an uneasy awareness that it wasn't over. That night, as I was shutting down my computer, a new email appeared in my personal inbox. The sender was a string of random letters and numbers, no subject line, just a single sentence in the body. Thank you. But the game has only just begun. The collapse came faster than anyone expected. Within a month of the first leaks, Helix Systems was in free fall. Contracts were canceled, investors pulled out, and key clients fled to competitors. The board dissolved under the weight of subpoenas. Patricia resigned in disgrace, her name forever linked to fraud. Chad vanished from the public eye. I watched it unfold from a distance, part of me savoring the justice, part of me hollowed out by the collateral damage. Hundreds of people, some friends, some strangers, were out of work. For them, the scandal wasn't about justice. It was about rent payments and empty bank accounts. I told myself the rot had to be cut out for anything new to grow, but it didn't make it easier to watch. One afternoon, I drove my mother to the park where she used to take me as a kid. The air was crisp, the leaves turning gold and red. We walked slowly along the path, her arm looped through mine. "You've been quiet," she said. "I've been thinking," I replied. "About what?" "About whether I did the right thing. People lost their jobs because of what I exposed." She stopped and looked at me. "And if you'd stayed quiet, the corruption would still be there. The same people would be hurt, just slower. Sometimes doing the right thing means you can't save everyone, but you can stop the wrong from spreading." I nodded, the weight in my chest easing a little. She was right. Silence would have been easier, but it wouldn't have been better. A week later, an email arrived from a company I'd once competed against. Orion Technologies. They were expanding, looking for a new chief technology officer. The offer was generous, more than I'd ever made at Helix, and came with promises of freedom to innovate. I met with their CEO, a sharp, direct woman named Laura Pierce. She laid out the role, the resources, the vision. It all sounded ideal, until I read the contract. Buried in the fine print was a clause, almost word for word identical to the one Helix had used to bind me. It gave the company sweeping control over intellectual property, even work done outside of company time. I slid the contract back across the table. "This needs to change." Laura arched an eyebrow. "Most people don't read that far." "I'm not most people," I said. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "What are you asking for?" "Full authority to design a transparent system, one where this kind of hidden clause can't exist. And if you want me, that starts with striking this from the contract." It was a risk. I half expected her to end the meeting right there. But instead, she smiled. "You've got yourself a deal." I signed the revised contract the next day. For the first time in months, I felt like I was stepping into something I could shape, not just survive. Still, a question lingered in the back of my mind, one I couldn't quite silence. What would you do if you had the chance to change the system, but it meant walking into another battlefield? On my first day at Orion, I settled into my new office, overlooking the city. The desk was clean, the computer still in its factory state. I powered it on, ready to start fresh. That's when the knock came. I looked up, and there he was, Chad. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his hair perfectly styled, that same infuriating half-smile on his face. "Looks like we're on the same side again," he said. I stared at him for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or curse. "I didn't know you were here." "Let's just say I have a knack for landing on my feet," he replied. "And now, you and we've got work to do." He walked out, leaving the faint scent of his cologne in the air. I turned back to my screen, the system login prompt waiting. My reflection stared back at me in the black glass, eyes a little harder, jaw set. I didn't know yet if this was a new beginning or the first step into another war. But as my fingers touched the keyboard, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, I was ready.